secure economy that works for everyone, and a more prosperous and outward-looking country. That's why these elections are so important, because they're about how Britain recovers, how our communities and public services are run, and how we reward our front line. Under my leadership, and with our great candidates across the country, Labour offers a very different route to recovery. Labour is changing, and our priorities are your priorities. Securing the economy, protecting the NHS, rebuilding Britain. In these elections, a vote for Labour is a vote to support our nurses, our doctors, our NHS staff, and to reward our key workers. This election is also a chance to vote against the Conservatives' tax rises on families. That's going to take money out of people's pockets at the worst possible time.
Reeves fired. Starmer kicks Reeves out of his cabinet after trying to challenge him during parliamentary meeting. Cracks are beginning to show in the government's economic policy, some caused by ministers themselves, others by mounting external pressure. The pressing question now is whether Chancellor Rachel Reeves can maintain control amid these challenges, and whether Prime Minister Keir Starmer even wants her to. It is really a good sign when a senior cabinet minister appears caught off guard by a major development in their own remit. Yet this was the awkward position in which the Chancellor found herself on Wednesday. While touring what appeared to be a factory or warehouse, dressed in the requisite high-visibility jacket, Reeves was asked about circulating rumours of a potential U-turn on the controversial cuts to winter fuel payments. Her response was firm, saying that policy stands, and adding that it had been necessary to stabilise the public finances. This line echoed what ministers had been repeating for weeks as justification for the cuts. Commons leader Lucy Powell had insisted the reductions prevented a run on the pound, while Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander claimed that without axing a universal pensioner benefit, the country would have witnessed the sort of chaos we saw under the Liz Truss government. However, just hours after Reeves reiterated the policy would remain, Prime Minister Starmer was standing in the Commons announcing its suspension. The decision to cut winter fuel payments had become deeply toxic for Labour. It was a significant factor in their declining poll numbers, as well as their poor performances in recent local elections and by-elections. It was often the first issue people mentioned when asked for their opinion of the party. As a result, a review of the policy is now underway, though scant details have emerged. There is still no clarity on how the government intends to re-evaluate the decision, when any changes will take effect, or where the necessary funding will come from. Starmer framed the U-turn as a result of the economy's improving condition. It is a bold move to link the reversal to stronger economic growth when most economists expect the 0.7% growth reported for the first quarter to be a one-off occurrence rather than a sustained trend. More worrying still is this week's data revealing the public finances remain in poor shape, further eroding whatever limited fiscal room Reeves had left ahead of the autumn budget. Government borrowing for April 2025 totaled £20.2 billion, primarily driven by increased public sector pay commitments and debt repayments. The Office for National Statistics reported that borrowing for the financial year 2020-25 was £148.7 billion, exceeding the Office for Budget Responsibility's forecast by £11 billion. This fiscal situation is far from encouraging. Economists warn that the latest borrowing figures shrink the Chancellor's fiscal headroom to a mere £6 billion, a negligible sum relative to the scale of government expenditure. Given this tight fiscal space, more tax increases appear likely. Ruth Gregory of Capital Economics commented that if Reeves wants to adhere to her so-called ironclad fiscal rules, additional tax hikes in the autumn budget will be inevitable, a view shared by many analysts. This circles us back to the Chancellor herself. Reeves has repeatedly insisted her fiscal rules are non-negotiable and has assured that the £40 billion tax increase introduced in her first budget was a one-off measure, never to be repeated. Yet, with MPs from within her own party successfully pressuring Number 10 into reversing the winter fuel cuts, Attention will now likely turn to other unpopular welfare
The
cuts.
confirmation of
Many on the
recession
Labour left
exposes
regard
a
these
government
as
and a Prime
unpalatable
Minister
and will push for changes.
completely.
Additionally, the government faces the task of persuading MPs that the forthcoming spending review, which is expected to impose significant departmental budget cuts, is both necessary and justified. The question remains, does Starmer possess the political courage to see this difficult agenda through? His biographer, Tom Baldwin, told Times Radio this week that the Prime Minister is not the kind of politician who proclaims firmly what he stands for. This observation can be
Today, the OBR has recognised the benefits of our plan to get Britain building.
Course as circumstances dictate, or he is a leader adrift without clear principles or convictions. The Chancellor's fate may well hinge on which of these portraits fits the Prime Minister better. If Starmer commits to his stated mantra of making tough decisions, then Reeves remains indispensable to the cause. However, if he concludes that the economic landscape, public opinion, or political winds have shifted sufficiently to loosen fiscal constraints, he may seek a chancellor more amenable to higher spending and borrowing. Reeves, whose credibility has been built around advocating for stringent fiscal discipline and painful spending choices, might then be sidelined. In such a scenario, Starmer could publicly thank Reeves for her service, crediting her with stabilizing the economy during Labour's first year in government. She has been tasked with cleaning up the Conservative fiscal mess, reassuring markets, and steering through a difficult budget. Following this, the Prime Minister could move her to a different cabinet role, perhaps the Foreign Office, to clear the way for abandoning strict fiscal rules and adopting a more expansive tax and spend agenda. Hints of this alternative approach have already leaked into the public domain via a memo penned by Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, which proposed a raft of tax increases targeting savers, pensions, shares, and banks. These measures suggest a willingness to raise taxes sharply to fund government spending priorities. Given this looming possibility, many hope that Reeves will remain in her position. The alternative risks turning Labour's already disappointing economic record into a high-stakes gamble driven by aggressive spending and taxing instincts, potentially alienating voters concerned about fiscal responsibility and economic stability. Thus, paradoxically, it may be time to launch a campaign to save Reeves. Keeping her in post offers at least some assurance that fiscal discipline and cautious economic stewardship will prevail. Losing her would likely herald a shift toward riskier economic policies, marked by heavier borrowing and tax increases, which could destabilize the government's fragile progress. As the government wrestles with these competing pressures, the broader economic and political landscape remains uncertain. Whether Starmer decides to double down on Reeves's fiscal strategy or pivot to a more expansive economic approach will significantly shape Labour's trajectory and its standing with voters. Meanwhile, the Chancellor must navigate not only the harsh realities of public finances, but also the complex dynamics of party politics, ministerial rivalries, and public opinion. The stakes are high, with economic challenges mounting from sluggish growth projections to ballooning debt. Labour's ability to maintain credibility with voters hinges on delivering clear, coherent policies that balance fiscal prudence with social investment. For Reeves, the challenge is formidable: to steer the economy through choppy waters while maintaining party unity and public confidence. Ultimately, the question is not just whether Rachel Reeves can stay in control of economic policy, but whether the Prime Minister's political calculus aligns with that goal. The coming months will reveal if Labour doubles down on fiscal discipline or embarks on a more ambitious, yet riskier economic path, and with it, the fate of its Chancellor. Cracks are increasingly evident within the government's economic policy framework, with some fissures caused by internal disagreements among ministers and others by mounting external pressures from economic realities and political expectations. The central question that arises is whether Chancellor Rachel Reeves can maintain a firm grip on the reins of economic policy during these turbulent times, and perhaps even more crucially, whether Prime Minister Keir Starmer desires her to do so. It is never a reassuring sign when a senior cabinet minister appears out of the loop about major policy announcements directly related to their portfolio. Yet this was precisely the position Chancellor Reeves found herself in on a recent Wednesday. While touring a facility that seemed to be either a factory or a warehouse where a high-visibility jacket was mandatory, she was unexpectedly asked about swirling rumors concerning a potential reversal of the controversial cuts to winter fuel payments. Reeves responded decisively, insisting that policy stands and justifying the cuts by claiming they were necessary to stabilize the public finances. This was the familiar script repeated ad nauseam by ministers defending the cuts. Commons leader Lucy Powell had maintained that the reductions were critical in preventing a run on the pound, while Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander argued that without eliminating this universal pensioner benefit, the country would have suffered the sort of chaos we saw under the Liz Truss government. Despite the Chancellor's steadfast public remarks, within hours, the Prime Minister stood in the House of Commons and announced that the policy would be suspended, marking a dramatic backtrack and a rare admission that the cuts had become politically untenable. The winter fuel payments controversy had undeniably become a political poison pill for Labour. It played a significant role in the party's plummeting poll numbers, contributing directly to their disappointing results in recent local elections and by-elections. The issue is frequently the first criticism people mention when asked what they think of Labour, highlighting its impact on public perception. On the economic front, the outlook remains fraught. While the first quarter of 2025 registered growth, most economists warn this is not a sustainable trend. Inflation pressures persist, global uncertainties loom large, and public debt remains stubbornly high. Government borrowing, which was already problematic before the latest policy shifts, now looks even less manageable. The fiscal space Reeves hoped to have when she took office is rapidly shrinking, forcing hard choices ahead. The autumn budget, therefore, is shaping up to be a defining moment. It is expected to lay out a difficult path, trimming departmental budgets, potentially raising taxes further, and carefully calibrating spending to avoid rocking market confidence. But implementing such measures requires not only economic skill, but also political courage. Reeves must manage expectations inside her party, placate skeptical MPs, and present a coherent narrative to the public explaining why these tough decisions are necessary. This is where Keir Starmer's role becomes pivotal. His leadership style, whether seen as cautious pragmatism or lack of firm conviction, will influence how these policies are perceived and whether they gain traction. Starmer's biographer, Tom Baldwin, noted that the Prime Minister does not publicly articulate firm ideological stance, instead opting for a flexible approach. This can be advantageous in navigating complex political terrain, but also risks being interpreted as indecisiveness. If Starmer decides to back Reeves' fiscal conservatism, it would signal a commitment to long-term economic stability at the expense of short-term popularity. This approach could restore some confidence among financial markets and cautious voters. It might deepen dissatisfaction among the party's left wing and parts of the electorate demanding more robust social support. Alternatively, if Starmer opts for a more expansionary fiscal policy, it could invigorate Labour's base and address pressing social needs but risk alarming markets and undermining the government's credibility on economic competence. The possibility of reshuffling key cabinet positions looms large. Moving Reeves from the Treasury to another significant but less fiscally focused role, such as Foreign Secretary, might be a strategic way to shift economic policy direction without appearing to undermine her publicly. This would allow the government to embrace a looser fiscal stance and introduce more ambitious spending programs funded by higher taxes and increased borrowing. Such a shift, however, would come with considerable risks. The leaked memo from Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner proposing a slew of new taxes on savers, pensioners, and financial institutions indicates an appetite within parts of the government for aggressive redistribution policies. These measures could be politically toxic if perceived as punishing hard-working middle-class voters or destabilizing financial markets. The government must weigh the social benefits of increased investment against potential economic fallout. Meanwhile, the broader economic context adds urgency. The UK economy faces external shocks from global geopolitical tensions, energy price volatility, and technological disruptions. Domestically, demographic changes and evolving labour market dynamics complicate fiscal planning. The government's ability to respond flexibly while maintaining fiscal discipline will be critical. Rachel Reeves stands at the centre of this maelstrom. Her stewardship of the Treasury will be judged not only on technical competence, but on her political acumen. Can she navigate internal party dynamics, public opinion, and economic realities to maintain her position? Will Starmer trust her to manage these conflicting demands, or will he seek a different economic narrative to galvanize support? The stakes extend beyond immediate budget cycles. Labour's credibility as a government capable of delivering both economic stability and social justice depends on how it handles these challenges. Failure to manage fiscal policy effectively risks alienating key voter groups and perpetuating narratives of economic mismanagement that have long plagued the party. Conversely, a well-executed fiscal strategy, balancing restraint with targeted investment, could rebuild confidence and set the stage for sustained political success. In conclusion, the cracks in the government's economic policy reflect deeper tensions between political pragmatism and ideological ambition, fiscal discipline and social welfare, market confidence and voter demands. Rachel Reeves embodies this tension, tasked with charting a course through economic uncertainty and political complexity. Keir Starmer's support or opposition will shape not only her fate, but the direction of the Labour government's economic strategy and, ultimately, the country's future. The coming months will be critical in determining whether this administration can reconcile these competing pressures or if the fractures will widen, threatening its stability and credibility. If Reeves stays, it will be a vote of confidence in fiscal responsibility and cautious economic management. If she is moved aside, it could mark the beginning of a riskier economic experiment, one with profound implications for the UK's economic health and political landscape. Either way, the eyes of the nation and the markets will be watching closely. The economic pressures facing the government are not occurring in a vacuum. They are unfolding amid a complex interplay of domestic political rivalries, public expectations, and global economic uncertainties. This environment places Rachel Reeves in a particularly challenging position as Chancellor. Her role, traditionally one of balancing fiscal prudence with social investment, has never been more scrutinized. Each policy decision sends ripples through financial markets, voter sentiment, and party dynamics. The backlash over the winter fuel payment cuts was a stark reminder of how sensitive social welfare policies remain. For many voters, particularly pensioners and lower-income households, these payments are a vital lifeline during the harsh winter months. The initial decision to cut them was widely seen as a political misstep, reflecting a disconnect between the government's fiscal ambitions and the lived realities of ordinary people. When Reeves publicly insisted the policy stands, despite mounting criticism, it revealed a dissonance that would soon become untenable. This moment also exposed fractures within the government's communication strategy, with cabinet ministers offering conflicting messages and doubling down on austerity rhetoric, others signaling potential reversals. The public was left confused and skeptical. The Prime Minister's eventual U-turn on the cuts, overriding his Chancellor's earlier stance, was not only a political necessity, but also an implicit admission of internal discord. The challenge now is to repair trust. For Labour, which has struggled with poor polling and disappointing election results, regaining public confidence is paramount. The party's economic credibility, long questioned in the wake of past fiscal crises, hinges on demonstrating both competence and compassion. Reeves' insistence on ironclad fiscal rules aims to reassure markets and centrist voters that Labour will govern responsibly.